The office window let in the last of the day's light, which was still warm and serene because the sun had not yet set. But everything was falling apart inside Jason. He sat there, his eyes fixed on the computer screen, but his mind couldn't focus. A new message had just arrived on his phone from Jake, his closest friend. A short, cryptic text. "Can you meet me? I have something important to discuss." A strange, uneasy feeling swept over him. Jake never sent messages like this. Jason wondered what had happened. Less than an hour later, Jason found himself driving to Sardino, the restaurant where he and Jake often met. He walked in and saw Jake sitting alone in a quiet corner, staring at his phone with an expression that was far from his usual calm demeanor. Jason walked up, shook his hand, and sat down across from him. "You look tense. What's going on?" Jason asked, trying to keep his voice calm despite the unease rising in him. Jake looked at him, his eyes filled with concern. "Jason, I don't know how to say this, but I saw a woman at the hotel this morning. She looked exactly like Lily." Jason froze, momentarily unable to process what Jake was saying. "Are you sure it was her?" he asked, his voice shaking slightly. Jake nodded, his face serious. "I'm sure. She walked out of room 611 and then went into room 614. But Lily should have been in room 612. Jason felt his stomach drop. He couldn't believe what he was hearing. "Lily? Lily wouldn't do that," he muttered under his breath. "What hotel was this?" he asked, his voice barely above a whisper. "The downtown Hyatt Regency. Are you okay?" Jake asked, clearly concerned. Jason must have looked visibly shaken. I don't know," Jason muttered, rubbing his face with his hands. "Maybe I should have kept this to myself," Jake added, regret in his tone. "But I thought you needed to know." "Did she notice you?" Jason asked, his mind racing. Jake thought for a moment, then nodded. "She glanced at me as she walked past, but she didn't recognize me. It was like she was sneaking back to her room. It's too much of a coincidence, right? I mean, we were both at the same hotel." Jason's appetite vanished, and he couldn't stop replaying Jake's words in his mind. He felt nauseous. The woman he trusted the most, his wife, had been seen leaving another man's room. The thought of it made his heart pound, the disbelief sinking in deeper. "What should I do now?" Jason asked, his voice hollow. "Jason, I know this is hard, but you need to figure out what's going on. I'm here for you, man. Let me know if you need anything," Jake said softly. Jason forced a smile, but it didn't reach his eyes. "Thanks, Jake. I'll keep you posted." He stood up, his mind spinning as he walked out of the restaurant, trying to make sense of everything he had just heard. The drive back to his office was a blur. Jason didn't know what to think, or even if he could trust his own thoughts. Lily had always been so careful, so committed to their relationship. But now, everything felt like a lie. Despite the unsettling conversation with Jake, Jason tried to convince himself that it was just a misunderstanding. Lily couldn't have done something like that. She had always been so dedicated to their life together. But the more he thought about it, the more the doubt gnawed at him. Was it possible that Jake had been mistaken, or had he seen something else? Something that wasn't as serious as it seemed? Jason began to notice small things that, in hindsight, felt like clues. Lily's recent business trips had been getting longer. She would often call him at odd hours, leaving him brief, distracted messages, as if her mind were elsewhere. There were nights when he would reach out to her, but she would tell him she was exhausted from work and needed rest. At first he brushed it off. She was busy after all. But something in her voice felt off, like she wasn't telling him the full truth. A small knot of unease twisted in his stomach, and it wouldn't go away. He had always trusted Lily, trusted her completely. But now that trust was starting to feel fragile, like it was built on sand. It wasn't long before Jason received another unexpected call. This time, it was from his boss, Sebastian. They had shared lunch with Sebastian and his wife, Natalie, several times before, so Jason didn't hesitate to pick up. "Hey, Jason, I just wanted to confirm something for you about Lily's trip. You're asking about her flight details, right?" Jason, still processing the unsettling thoughts in his mind, replied, Yeah, that's right. I wrote it down somewhere, but I misplaced it. Can you check with your travel department for me? Sebastian agreed, and the conversation continued in a typical casual tone. It wasn't until the end of the call that something stuck out to Jason. By the way, Sebastian mentioned, Lily took Matthew Hill with her again. He's a recent college grad we've been training to work with suppliers. This is his third trip with her. Jason paused. Matthew Hill? He had never heard of this guy before. The idea of Lily traveling with someone else, especially a young man like Matthew, stirred something deep in his chest. Why hadn't she mentioned him before? Why was he always tagging along? Trying to keep his cool, Jason responded, Thanks, Sebastian. I'm probably overthinking it. I just misplaced the flight details. Sebastian laughed. I wouldn't worry about it, Jason. Lily's a professional. She's got it all under control, but don't stress too much, okay? Jason hung up, but the unease only grew. He couldn't shake the feeling that something wasn't right. The idea that Lily was traveling with Matthew, someone she'd never mentioned to him before, made his stomach turn. He needed to know more, but he didn't want to jump to conclusions without any concrete evidence. That night, he found himself unable to sleep. His mind kept returning to the same troubling thoughts. Why hadn't Lily ever mentioned Matthew? Why had she chosen to travel with him so often? Something about this just didn't sit right with him. The next day, Jason decided to take action. He couldn't keep ignoring his gut feeling. He couldn't let this suspicion eat at him without knowing the truth. So he made a decision. He would go to the airport when Lily returned from her trip. He wouldn't tell her he was coming. He needed to see for himself what was really going on. Jason knew it was risky, but he felt like he had no other choice. He had to know if his fears were justified or if he was just being paranoid. Either way, he couldn't stand waiting any longer. His heart was already heavy, and the questions were piling up with no answers. It was time to confront the truth. Jason pulled into the parking lot at JFK. The familiar sights and sounds of the airport did little to calm his racing heart. The sky was beginning to darken as evening set in, but it felt like the world around him had slowed down. Every step he took toward the terminal seemed heavier than the last, each footfall echoing in his mind. He couldn't stop thinking about what Jake had told him, what he had seen, and what it all meant. Was he walking toward the truth, or was he about to destroy everything with his own hands? He tried to shake off the nerves, but they only intensified as he entered the terminal. The sound of rushing footsteps and the constant chatter of travelers blended into the background, a blur of noise as Jason's focus remained fixed on one thing: finding Lily. He scanned the crowd as people passed by, his eyes darting to every woman who looked remotely like her. He felt like a stranger in his own life, unsure of what he would find, but needing to find it anyway. Finally, after what felt like an eternity, he saw her. But she wasn't alone. His heart stopped. Standing beside her, his arm casually draped over her shoulder, was Alex. The man Jake had mentioned. The man who, in Jason's mind, had become a symbol of everything that felt wrong. They were laughing together, close, too close, and Jason couldn't move. For a moment, the world seemed to stand still. His breath caught in his chest as he watched them, Lily smiling in a way that didn't seem quite right, and Alex, his hand still on her as if it was the most natural thing in the world. The sight made Jason's stomach churn. His mind raced with 1,000 thoughts, none of which made sense. What was going on? Was this what Jake had seen? The closeness. It was all too much to process. His legs were stiff, as though his body was telling him to run, to leave, to avoid the pain that was coming. But he couldn't. Forcing himself to take action, Jason stepped closer, trying to remain calm. He couldn't believe it, but he had to know the truth. He couldn't stand there anymore, frozen in place. As he approached, Lily's eyes met his, and for a split second, it felt like the world had shifted. Her face turned pale as soon as she saw him, her expression shifting from surprise to guilt, to something that Jason couldn't quite place. It was as if she had been caught, and there was no escaping it. "Jason," she whispered, her voice trembling. "I didn't know you were coming." Jason couldn't even respond at first, his mind overwhelmed with a rush of anger and disbelief. How could she have done this? Right in front of him, in a public place, with someone else? Everything inside him wanted to shout, to demand answers. But the only words that came out were cold and calculated. "What's going on, Lily?" His voice was low, controlled, but it carried the weight of every emotion he had been holding in. Alex stepped back, his face a mixture of confusion and awkwardness. Clearly uncomfortable with the situation, Jason turned to him, his gaze sharp, as if seeing the young man for the first time. But the rage in his chest was directed only at Lily. "Who is this?" Jason's voice was harsh now, the question hanging in the air like a challenge. Lily swallowed hard, her eyes pleading. "Jason, it's not what you think. She cut herself off, clearly struggling to find the right words. It's nothing like you think it is. Please let me explain." But Jason couldn't listen to her anymore. The image of them together, the closeness, the laughter, it all felt like a betrayal, too raw to process. He couldn't bear to hear her excuses. "No, Lily," he interrupted, his tone final. "I don't need an explanation. I've seen enough." He turned away, his heart pounding, the anger coursing through him like wildfire. But just as he began to walk off, he heard her call out, "Jason, wait!" He didn't turn around. He couldn't. He couldn't stand to see her anymore, to hear her say another word. The noise of the airport felt distant as he walked through the crowd, his mind racing, his body numb. He couldn't think, couldn't process, couldn't believe any of this was real. It all felt like a nightmare he couldn't wake up from. But somewhere deep inside, Jason knew it was over. The trust that had held their relationship together had been shattered. There was no going back. Not now. Not after this. And when he reached the parking lot, he got in his car without a second glance, the engine roaring to life as if to drown out the pain in his chest. It was only then, with the city lights flickering in the rearview mirror, that Jason allowed himself to feel the crushing weight of what had just happened. The woman he loved, the woman he had trusted with everything. She had betrayed him. Jason sat alone in the dimly lit room, the only light coming from the small desk lamp. Despite the time that had passed, the turmoil inside him had yet to fade. He had said everything that needed to be said to Lily, but it seemed like no words could change anything. She had gone too far, and he couldn't go back to the way things were. But that didn't mean he was ready to throw everything away. The idea of forgiveness felt like a heavy burden he couldn't lift. Lily had left their home. She hadn't come back after their confrontation. Jason hadn't expected her to. The look of disappointment he had given her still lingered in his mind. He had seen regret in her eyes, but it wasn't enough to ease the pain he was feeling. Their relationship, could it ever be mended? That question circled in his mind, but there was no answer, only uncertainty. In the days that followed, Jason tried to focus on work, as if it were the only thing that could distract him from the chaos in his mind. But every time he looked at his empty hand, where Lily's touch used to be, he couldn't help but feel defeated. Everything seemed blurry. He felt like he was lost in his own life, unsure of what to do next. One afternoon, as the rain began to fall outside, Jason received a call. It was Jake. "Jason, are you okay?" Jake asked as soon as he picked up the phone, his voice filled with concern. "No, I'm not okay," Jason replied, his voice breaking. "I don't know what to do anymore. Everything's fallen apart." His voice cracked with exhaustion. "Lily's gone, and I don't know if I can keep going." "Then you have to do something, Jason. You can't just sit there," Jake said, his tone firm. "Face it, man. Whatever happens, you can't keep living like this." Jason sighed. Jake's words were like a wake-up call. He had been so tired of fighting these emotions on his own. He couldn't live like this anymore, stuck in the pain and uncertainty. Even if he couldn't change the past, at least he could make the decision to move forward. Something inside him stirred. He had to stand up. He had to face what had happened. He couldn't keep being the confused, lost man, wondering if everything could go back to the way it was. With new resolve, Jason decided to speak to a lawyer. He wanted to do things right, not let the fog of uncertainty drag on any longer. She couldn't break him, he decided. But when he walked into the lawyer's office, things became even harder than he expected. Every question the lawyer asked about joint property, financial agreements, it all felt too real, too clear. There was no denying it. This was the end. After meeting with the lawyer, Jason returned to the apartment. But this time, he didn't feel quite as alone. The emptiness inside him had begun to lessen. He wasn't trying to convince himself anymore. This was it. He didn't have Lily by his side, but he could move on. He didn't know what would come next, but at least now, he felt like he could begin again. He wasn't the man holding on to old promises. He wasn't the man who would wait for explanations. He was Jason G, and a man who could pick himself up and move forward. On a weekend afternoon, when the rain had stopped and the light began to pour in through the window, Jason received another call from Lily. This time, it wasn't just apologies. It wasn't just regret. She told him she had been seeing a therapist, that she was working on herself, and that she would never go back to Alex. Jason, I hurt you so much, but I don't want to lose you. I can change. I will prove it. Jason listened, but those words no longer had the same weight. He didn't need to hear them anymore. He knew where he stood now. He wasn't the one who needed fixing. I can't go back to you, Lily, he said, his voice steady. I can't live in lies anymore. But I will be okay. I will live for myself. The call ended, but Jason didn't feel the same confusion he had felt before. He had made his decision. A new life was waiting for him, whether or not Lily was in it. He wouldn't let the betrayal destroy everything. Each day, each step he took now would be forward. No looking back, no regrets. Jason knew that even though everything had changed, he could still find the strength to start over. Jason sat in the empty room, the dim light of the desk lamp flickering as the quietness of the space settled around him. He had spent so many hours in this very spot with Lily by his side, sharing everything, trusting each other. Now everything felt like it had been reduced to rubble. The weight of the last few days still hung heavily in the air. He'd made his decision. There was no going back. He couldn't keep waiting for something that wasn't coming. Couldn't keep wondering if everything would go back to normal. Lily was gone, and despite the pain, Jason realized he wasn't as lost as he had been in the beginning. His anger had started to fade, replaced by a numb, quiet acceptance. It wasn't easy, but it was the only way forward. The idea of forgiveness, of starting over, didn't seem so far-fetched anymore. But there was still that ache, that deep, gnawing pain in his chest every time he thought of her. He tried to fill the silence with work, keeping busy to avoid thinking about the mess his life had become. But no matter how much he distracted himself, his mind always returned to Lily. The memory of her. The way she had looked at him the moment she knew she had been caught. He couldn't escape it. He couldn't ignore the fact that the woman he had loved, the one he had given everything to, had betrayed him. It wasn't just the affair that hurt him, though. It was the lies, the secrets, the way everything between them had been built on something he could no longer trust. The foundation of their relationship was broken, shattered into pieces, and he didn't know if it could ever be repaired. The phone rang, and Jason snapped back into reality. He checked the screen and saw it was Lily. He hesitated for a moment, fingers hovering over the screen, wondering what she could possibly say this time. Part of him didn't want to answer, to avoid hearing her voice again. Another part of him wanted to know what she had to say. The conflict inside him was unbearable. He answered the call, his voice steady but cold. "What do you want, Lily?" "I'm sorry, Jason," she said softly, her voice trembling. I need to explain. Please, just listen." Jason closed his eyes for a moment, his thoughts racing. He didn't want to hear it. He didn't want to hear another excuse or another apology. He had heard it all before. But there was something in her voice, something raw, something desperate that made him hesitate. "Go ahead," he said, his tone flat. "I've been seeing a therapist," Lily continued, her voice breaking. I know I've made so many mistakes, but I want to change. I can't lose you, Jason. I want to make things right, please. Just give me a chance." Jason listened, but the words didn't reach him the way they once would have. He could hear her regret. feel the weight of her sincerity. But it wasn't enough. He couldn't just forget what she had done. He couldn't pretend it didn't happen. "I'm sorry, Lily," Jason said, his voice calm but resolute. "I can't go back to that. I can't go back to you. It's over." There was a long pause on the other end of the line, and Jason could hear her crying. But he didn't soften. "You've made your choice. I've made mine. I need to move on." "I'm sorry, Jason. I'm so sorry," she whispered, but the words didn't change anything. He hung up the phone, the weight of the conversation sinking in. Jason sat back in his chair, staring at the phone in his hand, feeling a strange sense of peace. The pain hadn't disappeared, but it was manageable. He knew what he had to do now. He had to move forward. No more looking back. No more clinging to the past. There was a life ahead of him. A life without Lily. And while it wasn't what he had imagined, it was still his. He could rebuild, piece by piece, until the cracks no longer defined him. And for the first time in what felt like forever, he realized that maybe, just maybe, he could be okay again.